Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we're gonna make a Q&A session. I'm going to answer some of the questions you guys left in the comment section of my videos in the past week or week and a half or so. We have quite some interesting questions this time as well, and with that said, let's just start with the first question. Adrian is saying their orchid seems to not dry out all that fast. They have 55-60% humidity, and they water their orchids every 10 to 12 days. However, the medium doesn't seem to dry out completely. If he were to let the medium dry completely, it would take 3 weeks for the orchid pot to completely dry out. What should they do? Well, first and foremost, let's get to the source. Why is your pot actually staying all that moist? Is it the humidity? I suspect it's not. 55-60% humidity is not very high. It's well suited for Phalaenopsis orchids, but it's not enough to maintain a pot super wet. Temperature, that has a heavier word than humidity, to be fully honest. If in your growing space temperatures are pretty low, let's say maybe 20 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees Celsius, you'll have Fahrenheit equivalent on the screen, then yes, pots might actually stay quite moist. But if the temperature is higher than that, it's not really normal for a pot to stay 3 weeks wet, even with your humidity, even if let's say you don't have ventilation in your growth space. So my guess is that the medium itself is breaking down and the bark does not hold its shape anymore, does not hold all of these air pockets, but is rather mushy like a sponge. That's when it retains more water. And especially because you say you have a full bark setup, so no mixtures with moss or anything that can retain water, my best guess is that the medium is actually kind of broken down. So do check if that's the case. See how the bark looks like. If it's maintaining its shape, then everything is okay. But if it's not, and particularly if it has a really funky odor whenever you water the orchid, then it's time to repot the orchid and choose a fresh new medium which maintains its shape, maintains those air pockets for the roots to breathe. Soaking always makes the bark retain even more water because even fresh bark, if you soak it, is not supposed to dry all that slow. So my best guess, it's the bark. It might actually be old or very poor quality. But in case it's fresh new medium, absolutely fine, holding its shape, holding the air pockets, then definitely don't soak the orchid pot anymore. Just run water through the pot, let it drain very well and put it back in its place. Maybe think about raising the temperature a little bit, air circulation in your growing space, things that can actually improve water evaporation. Humidity, I would not bother with it. It's ideal for Phalaenopsis orchids actually. Adrian actually has 2 more questions that I'm gonna answer. He's asking, what about fertilizing sticks? Are they worth using? Well, I used fertilizer sticks 7-8 years, 9 years ago, way before YouTube. I had some Phalaenopsis, and of course I bought those fertilizer sticks, put them in the medium, and when I repotted the orchid, or at some point, I noticed that the roots around where I put the stick were actually black, and they just didn't look as good as all of the other roots. So even before YouTube, even before I got acquainted to orchids, I just thought those fertilizer sticks are not good news. They just seem to concentrate a lot of their power, let's say, in one place, as opposed to the slow release fertilizer, which is much tinier. It's in the form of a sphere. So yes, those ones, they do concentrate fertilizer where they are as well, but they're very tiny and you can spread them around. So my experience has been very bad with fertilizer sticks, and I was never actually interested in ever trying any fertilizer stick ever again. How many times did I say ever? Simply because you cannot control the amount of fertilizer, and also I don't think you can have an even distribution. So they're not for me, but I'm sure there are people who have no issues with them. I just cannot recommend them to you. And for your last question, do I ever sanitize the flower spike tips after I cut them? I actually don't. I used to do that, and maybe, you know, it's a good idea to do so if you have time, if you have availability, if you like to do that. What I discovered is that structures which are very woody, such as flower spikes, rhizomes, in the case of sympodials, they don't typically have issues. Since they're woody, we're not talking about excessive amounts of moisture. Things like a leaf or a pseudobulb, those are very wet. They're full of moisture. So whenever we cut a leaf or things of the sorts, we're gonna have a very big portion, very wet, exposed. And pathogens thrive in wetness and humidity. That's how they travel through the plant. So no, I don't typically put anything on flower spikes. I do, however, try to sterilize or promote dryness whenever I cut leaves and pseudobulbs. Anka is asking, what is an affordable medium to change a Phalaenopsis in? PS, I live in the UK if that helps. Well, I have to say that generally, no matter the brand, orchid media will probably be a little bit more expensive than regular soil because it's just a different material. Orchid media typically contains bark, not soil, or it should not contain soil. So these materials are just harder to obtain, I suppose. With that said, of course, you can find brands which are more affordable than others. However, out of personal experience, I will tell you, don't go for the cheapest brand. I'll link it down below. I'll try to find the whole saga. I used a very affordable brand at some point in comparison to other stuff that I used, and it didn't end up so well. I discovered that the medium was not sterilized and it infected my orchids with all sorts of fungal stuff. I even found mushrooms growing in the potting media. Recently, I purchased a medium from Compo, which is a big brand, but it's just a conventional, normal brand. It's not orchid specialized. With that brand, again, it smelled so moldy. It had so much dust that I didn't feel well. I really started to cough. Something did bad to me. So I threw that medium away, and the pots in which I used it grew mushrooms. So I don't trust it with my orchids. Bottom line, I don't think you should go for the cheapest medium because I think you'll have issues down the road, and health-wise, I've experienced some bad outcomes, so I cannot tell you get the cheapest one. This, however, doesn't mean that you have to go for the most expensive one either. Typically, I find that the more expensive the medium is, the better quality it is. For example, Orchiata versus normal bark. Orchiata is higher quality. It should last you longer because it doesn't degrade as fast, doesn't hold so much moisture. But the Orchiata is 3 times more expensive or more than regular bark. Also, you can find mixes from companies which specialize in orchids. I think the most expensive mix that I have is the Repot Me one, but it's so nice. I like it so much. But they use Orchiata, they use best grow sphagnum moss, not chili moss or stuff of the sorts. They use other ingredients as well that you would buy separately to make a mix. So you can definitely buy stuff separately and mix it up yourself, of course, and I think it will be more affordable. The problem is finding those ingredients. In my region, there is no orchid mix that only sells bark. That's all I want, just bark, nothing else. So I actually use a pet shop product from Zoomed. This is fir bark, but it only comes in small grade. There's no big grade. It works for me because my climate is warm, but it might not work for you. Also, a viewer pointed out that some products destined for lizards have fungicides and other stuff. They shouldn't have, but sometimes they do, and those affect orchids as well. So it's risky not to use something specially designed for orchids. However, it's also a trial and error until you find a good brand, a good mix, and brands really differ from territory to territory. I assure you, you don't have any of the brands that I have here, except maybe Compo, which is very big. And I don't recommend Compo. I had a bad experience with that. So you're just gonna have to trial and error it, but I would advise you to just find stuff separately. If you find a mix which only has bark, go with that, just buy the bark. And then you can find a little leca separately to mix it with, sponge rock, even sphagnum moss if you need it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm afraid it's going to be trial and error. I don't know what brands you have available, certainly not the brands that I have available here, because the brands I have here are manufactured even in Eastern Europe. So I don't know where they distribute. If you want top quality, yeah, Repot Me. But it's more expensive, of course, and the transport is quite a lot because they're not yet in Europe. They will be at some point, but I'm not sure when. Definitely you can go for local stuff. It will just be trial and error, and yeah, I would not go for the cheapest stuff. Susie is asking how to maintain the beautiful model pattern on a Phalaenopsis orchid. Does it have to do with the light, with the fertilizer? Any ideas? Well, that's a very, very good question, actually. I've never experienced modeled Phalaenopsis orchids not being modeled anymore. but I think that the quality of the pattern and the vividness can actually be affected by some factors. As you were saying, light, fertilizer, watering, all of these things I believe should just be proper. So I don't believe that stronger light will make for a better pattern. No, I think adequate light will make for a better pattern. Same with watering and fertilizer. The better care you take of your orchid, the better the pattern will be as well. At least this has been my experience with Phalaenopsis. However, with variegated orchids, it's a whole different story. Variegation is not something natural. I was just showing you the Schilleriana, which naturally has that really nice mottling on the leaves. In nature, she has it as well. However, variegation is something else. It's a gene we selected. And it's not always a stable gene. It's prone to being affected by all sorts of stuff, such as environment, the age of the orchid even, the fertilizer we're using, maybe, possibly. There are orchids which maintain their variegation intact without you having to do anything. However, there are orchids which change their variegation, such as the Neophanetia. And I think you can notice that as the plant matured, it kind of lost its stripes. They're not as vivid anymore, at least on the mother plant. The keikis, they still have some variegation. So I'm researching this. Apparently it has to do with light, but I'm giving very bright light and it's not helping it. Some websites say that some neos will simply lose their variegation as they age, and that is that. I'm hoping it's not the case, but yeah, I don't know if it's the light really in this case, because the keikis, they do produce a beautiful variegation. The mother plant is the issue. So when it comes to variegation, it can be rather tricky because it's just a selected gene, in some cases maybe even an obtained gene, and it's not always super stable. But natural patterns and mottling, they should remain on the orchid no matter what. And of course, if your orchid requires more intense light, the pattern will look best when you give more intense light. If your orchid requires more water, the mottling will also look better if you give your orchid more water, and so on and so forth. It really just depends on the requirements of each and every orchid. And you might hear that mottling is intensified by bright light. Well, that's just because the orchid requires brighter light. But for the Phalaenopsis, in my experience, you don't really have to do anything other than just provide whatever it needs. Elizabeth is asking, if a Phalaenopsis leaves are growing towards the light, do I not advise changing the position of the plant? I'm guessing in order to make it straight again. I actually don't. I know in the past I talked about shaping flower spikes with the light, links down below to that video. I also talked about the pseudobulbs or the new growths again being shaped by the light, but when it comes to Phalaenopsis and their leaning tendency, no, I really don't suggest that you change the position, because these orchids are not producing new growths, which you can play around with. They actually only have one stem, and once it's rigid, it's not gonna go back. They have leaves that, again, once they're rigid, they're not gonna change shape way too much. So what happened to me when I tried to change the position is that I got a Phalaenopsis with twisty leaves. So let's presume that I'm changing the position of the orchid like this, and it faces the light with this side now. This leaf will grow on this side, or this leaf will grow like this, and then it will start to twist. And in the end, I'm gonna have an orchid with leaves all over the place, but the stem will continuously be tilted to one side, or it will be tilted to one side, and then in a year or two, it will start to tilt on this side, but only with the top part. It's a mess. In my experience, it's just a mess. You can control the level of tilt to some extent with some orchids if you maintain the light above. But even so, this orchid has been growing under my LED light, and do we notice what it's doing? It's starting to tilt already. It is its nature. I'm not gonna go against it because I'm just gonna mess the whole look of the orchid. So no, I don't suggest that you tilt, or actually, sorry, turn the orchid to face light in different directions. In my experience, that just does not look good. ERJ is saying that they're noticing my orchids are potted in a clear pot and then put in another decorative pot. Is it okay to use that orchid ceramic pot that we see in the garden center alone? And well, no, it's not a really good idea, because these pots don't have drainage holes. They're just decorative, they're just masks. This, on the other hand, has drainage holes. and I like to put some aeration holes as well. The example I'm showing you is not a good example because I'm creating a seal here. I need to buy some pots, but for now I'm just trying to avoid algae. That's all I'm doing. And it's summer, it's okay. But let's get you a better example. The idea of the decorative pot is to just maintain darkness in the pot so we don't end up with excessive algae, and also to make the orchid more stable, catch the water so it doesn't ruin furniture, and just look pretty. But a decorative pot should always be bigger than the orchid pot so we have ventilation, and you should always have drainage holes in your orchid pot. So if you do want to use these pots, you can actually, but you need to drill some drainage holes. Now, some orchid experts will use these pots as they are in kokedamas with sphagnum moss. I'm getting into further details here, but I just want to mention it because if I don't, somebody in the comments will. So you can definitely use these pots if you know what you're doing. But if you're a beginner, don't use these pots. It's better to use something with drainage, with ventilation, something transparent that lets you see the root system, see how you're doing, see if the roots are okay, if you have mold outbreaks, or who knows what you have in the pot. At the beginning, better stick to the clear plastic pot, and you can definitely put it in a decorative pot if you like the look of it. Jazz is saying they have 2 keikis growing on one of the flower spikes of their orchid. The mother orchid doesn't seem stressed or diseased. Is it normal? Yes, it's absolutely normal. Phalaenopsis orchids can create quite a lot of keikis if they so desire, especially the equestris. As a species, equestris is notorious for creating a lot of keikis and being able to sustain them actually. So what you need to look out for are signs of stress, such as droopy leaves, the mother plant just stopping growth altogether. If you have some leaves just forming, the orchid might actually stop growing those leaves and take care of the keikis. That could happen, which is not necessarily very bad for the mother plant, but it will stale its growth. So I would say that if the mother plant has stiff leaves, everything is okay. But once you see the leaves going droopy, leathery, even though you watered the orchid, then that's a sign of stress, and I would just remove at least one of the keikis. Also, make sure that you don't let your orchid be very bone dry for too long. Orchids which have keikis, they do need a little bit more help to sustain them, so make sure that you do water in time. You don't have to maintain the orchid soggy or anything, but just make sure that you don't let it dry out way too much because it is more prone to dehydration now, as it needs to sustain 2 babies until they create roots of their own. And the last question comes from Tom. They're saying, I understand not watering from above, so water doesn't sit in between the leaves. But in the wild, how does rainwater not collect in between the leaves? That is a great question. And first of all, thank you so much for being nice about it. Typically, when I get this question, it's not a question. It's something like, okay, little girl, if you're so smart, then explain to me, how do orchids cope with rain in nature? Because it gets everywhere. See, you don't know, you're wrong, you're stupid. So yeah, that's usually the comment that I get. And I usually don't bother with those comments because obviously people know much more than me. So there's nothing I can teach them. But whenever I get a genuine question, I'm more than happy to answer, and I think I will do a separate video with a lot of detail actually, because I do get it. It's kind of weird not to put water on the orchid because in nature it rains all the time. Why doesn't the orchid do anything about it if it's so bad to leave water in the crown, right? Anyway, I answered my viewer. I will give a short answer now, and I will make a separate video probably next week that I can add to those old tutorials. So first things first, you actually asked a really correct question in saying, how does the orchid avoid having a pool of water? Simple. It doesn't grow like this in nature. It grows on trees like this, and actually the leaves tend to droop down. So all of the water that collects, or most of it, just slides right off. It doesn't actually pool all that much in the structures of the orchid. And from the get-go, this is a major help, because whatever is left simply gets evaporated by the constant wind. There are other things to talk about, of course, but I will leave them for a different video. So from the get-go, you can see that there are 2 major differences between our living room, which might not be ventilated, might not be full of fans that will move air all the time and improve water evaporation. And also in our homes, we typically grow orchids like this. Hence why we have Phalaenopsis just starting to lean over time. Because it's their nature, because they're avoiding water in nature, or actually pooling water in the crown. Now, doesn't mean that if you put water in the crown, you will immediately have crown rot. Absolutely not. You just need to have very bad luck. And the problem with this ailment is that it's not rare, it's quite common. Crown rot, stem rot, it's not something uncommon. And being that most of my viewers are home growers and I don't really know what the conditions in their home are, I prefer to just play it safe and say, you know what? If you have water in the crown, just remove it just to avoid potential complications. I know it might sound hard to believe, but it does happen quite often. And you only need to have crown rot once to learn your lesson for a lifetime, because if you don't spot it in time, it can actually completely take the orchid. So that's the explanation with water and how prone you are to crown rot and all of these ailments. Well, it really depends on your environment, on the season even. Some people grow orchids outside, which from the get-go, it's much more ventilated, but still it doesn't mean that they're completely safe if they grow their orchids like this. So there are many details and aspects to think about, which I would much rather put in a video because I want to go into full details so that everybody understands. But yeah, those were just some of the differences between how we grow orchids in a living room and how they actually grow naturally in nature. One more thing before I let you go, it has to do with comments actually. For a while now, YouTube had this beta program in which it would hold comments which had potentially bad words, such as curse words, profanities, things of the sorts. They would keep them in the spam folder until you visit it and see which comment is actually okay, which is not. So I had this for a long time and it was so good. I think in 1 year, I only had one public comment that had a swear word. Other than that, everything just went into the spam. It was so great. I don't use curse words on my channel and I don't feel comfortable having comments with those words. I just want to keep things family friendly, you know? So I always removed all of those comments, but for the past year or so, YouTube has done it for me and it has done a beautiful job with the provision that some good comments would slip through as well because the algorithm just needs time to learn. Well, recently, I think the algorithm is doing another thing. Do you notice now that when you go to a video and you scroll down to leave a comment, you have a pop-up window from YouTube saying, hey, keep it friendly, don't be rude, blah, blah. Well, I think the algorithm is picking up on rudeness now because I found some comments in my spam folder which did not use curse words, but were not good comments. They were not friendly. They were pretty rude. You know how you can be mean and rude to somebody without actually using bad words? Yeah. And I was like, hold up, what's happening here? And I actually found a reply. So I was having a conversation with somebody and I said something that probably they didn't like, they didn't agree to, so they decided to turn nasty. They didn't use curse words, but I found that reply in the spam folder. The algorithm detected that it wasn't an appropriate comment. So I'm like, that's great. Up until now, I didn't bother with these comments. When I check my comments, I check the comments from all of my 2000 videos. It's not just only for this video or this or that. It's everything when I look in my feed because I want to see what people are saying everywhere and what they're asking. And the questions that I answer, you can see they come from various videos. So having unnecessary comments just wastes my time. And if the algorithm can actually ban the ones that really don't add anything useful, then wow, that would be so great. So note to you guys, try to be friendly in the comment section and keep it decent because apparently now the algorithm knows what you mean to say. And also for those of you who are creators, do check the spam folder because there are errors. Good comments can go through the spam folder as well. The algorithm needs to learn so you can manually approve them from there. But yeah, as for me, if YouTube considers that those comments are useless, who am I to disagree? It just makes life so much easier. I swear, sometimes I just see these comments and then I see people actually defending me or starting this conversation, which really isn't useful for anybody. It has nothing to do with orchids. I don't want to see that in the comment section. It's not useful for anybody. I started to moderate my comment section a lot more heavily recently because nobody cares if somebody doesn't like my pinky nail. You know, I don't need those comments in my comment section. They waste time for everybody. But I think the algorithm is starting to take care of that and that's great. And yeah, just be friendly and polite in the comment section. It doesn't matter if you disagree, but just be nice about it. Because chances are from now on, YouTubers will not see any nasty comments anymore. What world will that be, huh? Alright, so that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. You know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you wish to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!